Sarah Mitchell ran a company worth $300 million. She'd closed deals that made grown men sweat. She'd built an empire from the ground up by 34. But that Tuesday afternoon, in a quiet courtyard behind the Riverside Children's Healing Center, she watched her 6-year-old daughter do something no doctor had been able to make happen. In nearly 3 years, Emma walked up to a stranger, a man in a navy work jacket kneeling on the concrete, tying his own daughter's shoe. Emma tugged on his sleeve, and she whispered 2 words. 2 words she hadn't spoken since the night her father didn't come home. Sarah froze, her tailored suit suddenly weightless against the cold stone wall behind her. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a sound at all. "Say it again. Baby, please. Say it again." This is the story of how a 6-year-old, a maintenance worker, and a coffee machine on the 2nd floor helped a family find a way through something money couldn't fix. Stay with me. Sarah Mitchell was the kind of woman who made boardrooms go silent the moment she walked in. 34 years old, CEO of a tech firm in Boston, on the cover of Forbes 30 Under 30. She negotiated mergers like she was ordering coffee, calm, precise, untouchable. But every weekday at 5:30 in the afternoon, Sarah did something none of her employees would ever guess. She drove herself, not her chauffeur, just her, across the river to a quiet brick building on Maple Street, a place called Riverside Children's Healing Center. And the moment she stepped through those glass doors, Sarah Mitchell, the woman who terrified Wall Street, became someone else entirely. She became a mother who couldn't reach her own child. Her daughter's name was Emma, 6 years old, dark hair cut bluntly at the shoulders, quiet hands she always kept folded in her lap. Emma could put together a 100-piece puzzle in 12 minutes flat. She understood every word the adults around her said. She laughed at jokes, small, soft laughs that disappeared as fast as they came. But Emma didn't talk. Not shy didn't talk. Not going through a phase didn't talk. She hadn't said a single word, not one, in 2 years and 9 months. The doctors had a name for it, selective mutism. But that name didn't capture what it actually felt like. It felt like watching your daughter live behind a window and not being able to figure out which side of the glass you were on. Sarah had tried everything. Speech therapists at $400 an hour, child psychologists who drove up from Manhattan, music therapy, art therapy, play therapy, a specialist from Johns Hopkins who flew in once a month. She had spreadsheets. She had treatment plans. She had every resource a mother with money could possibly buy. And none of it, not one piece of it, had made Emma speak. Sarah's private fear, the one she'd never said out loud, was simple. She had built a perfect machine around her daughter, and her daughter was suffocating inside it. But Sarah didn't know how to stop building. Building was the only thing she knew how to do. The silence didn't start randomly. It started on a specific night. Emma was 3 years old. She was supposed to be asleep. She wasn't. What Emma heard that night was her parents fighting in the kitchen below. Voices climbing, sharp, final, and then the front door. Her father, Michael, said he'd be back in the morning. He didn't make it to morning. A drunk driver. I-90 overpass, 2 hours after midnight. Emma woke up to a house full of strangers with red eyes, adults who kept touching her hair, using words like arrangement and procedure, but never saying the word gone. Sarah told herself for years that Emma's silence was grief, but grief had a shape she could understand. This felt like something else. This felt like Emma had made a decision that at 3 years old she didn't have the words to explain. The therapist would later try to explain it to Sarah this way. When small children are present at a moment of family rupture, sometimes their brains do something we don't have a clean word for. They connect the wrong dots. They decide that they caused it, not through logic, through being 3 years old and frightened and in the wrong room at the wrong moment. For Emma, somewhere in that small, scared 3-year-old logic, speaking itself had become dangerous. Her voice, somehow, was the thing that had made her father leave. She had been silent ever since, trying to keep what was left of her family safe. His name was David Reynolds, 36 years old, maintenance coordinator at the Riverside Children's Healing Center. He fixed broken windows. He restocked supply closets. He moved chairs when the therapy rooms got rearranged. His salary was $41,000 a year. Most of the parents who walked through Riverside didn't know his name. Some of them didn't even see him. It wasn't cruelty. It was just the way attention works in a building full of urgent things. David had learned not to take it personally, but he hadn't always carried a tool belt. For 9 years, David had run a small carpentry shop 2 towns over. He built bookshelves for young families, cribs that fathers were too proud to admit they couldn't assemble, a handful of kitchen tables that had outlasted the marriages they were built for. He was good at it. He loved it. Then his own marriage fell apart. His wife Jennifer left on a Sunday morning in October. She said she needed someone willing to feel things alongside her, not someone who tried to fix everything by hand. David got the apartment. She got the freedom. And their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, got bounced between 2 homes that didn't fit her anymore. The shop didn't survive the divorce. He couldn't keep the lease and pay child support and be the parent who picked Lily up at 3. So David did what people do when the math stops working. He took the steady job that paid the bills, and he tried to be home when it mattered. Most afternoons, David picked Lily up from school and brought her back to the center. She'd sit at the small table near the indoor garden, do her homework, drink her juice box. Lily was the kind of 7-year-old who carried a notebook of questions she wanted answered, organized by subject, color-coded. She was, as everyone at Riverside agreed, impossible not to like. When the weather was good, Lily played in the courtyard with the other kids. She'd figured out something most adults never do. Some kids needed loud games. Some kids needed to be near the activity, without being pulled into it. Lily had a gift for telling which was which, and one of the kids she watched, quietly, gently, without ever pushing, was a little girl who never spoke. A little girl named Emma. It happened on a Tuesday, 3:45 in the afternoon, late October in Boston. The light in the courtyard had that golden leaning quality that only happens in fall in New England. David was kneeling on the concrete walkway by the garden beds, tying Lily's left shoe. The lace had come undone for the 3rd time that week. He had a routine for it. He'd tie the shoe and tell her a small story while he did. That afternoon, he was telling her about a squirrel he'd seen in the parking lot, trying to drag an entire bagel across the asphalt. Lily was objecting strongly. Squirrels did not eat bagels. That was simply not a thing they did. David was insisting that this particular squirrel hadn't gotten the memo. Lily was laughing, and 6 feet away, closer than she'd ever stood before, Emma was watching. Sarah was on the other side of the courtyard, talking to a therapist, glancing toward Emma every few seconds, like she always did. David finished the knot. Lily jumped up and ran toward the sandbox. David started to stand, and Emma stepped forward. She reached out. She took hold of a fold of his jacket. Not a grip, not a pull, just a touch that meant stay. She looked up at him, and in a voice so small it was almost only breath, Emma said 2 words again, "Daddy." David went completely still. His first thought was that he'd misheard. His second thought, half a second later, was that he hadn't. He didn't move, he didn't reach for her, he didn't say a word, because something in the stillness of this child, something he couldn't have named in that moment, told him that any sudden motion would break it. He just stayed exactly where he was, crouched at her level, and he gave Emma the same calm attention he gave Lily. When she was telling him about a bug she'd found, he didn't perform. He didn't react. He just saw her. Sarah hadn't heard her cross the courtyard. She didn't remember running, but suddenly she was 3 feet behind her daughter, on her knees on the cold concrete, her hand pressed against her mouth so hard her teeth hurt. Her voice, when it came out, was wrecked. "Say it again. Baby, please, say it again." Emma turned, looked at her mother, and something flickered across her face. Not fear, something more like being caught. Caught doing something she wasn't sure was allowed. Emma pressed her lips together. She didn't speak again. She stepped back. Not away, just back. The whole moment lasted maybe 40 seconds. Sarah stayed on her knees on the concrete for a long time after Emma had walked back inside. David didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. But something had changed, for all 4 of them, and none of them quite understood what it was yet. That night, Sarah didn't open her laptop. She sat at her kitchen counter for 2 hours, a glass of wine she didn't drink, the dishwasher humming. And she thought about something her psychologist, Dr. Karen Bennett, had said weeks earlier. Children sometimes find their way back to us through people we don't get to choose. She also picked up the phone twice to call her mother in Worcester, and put it down again, twice. She hadn't told her mother that Emma had spoken. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it more real. Maybe because she was afraid it had been the only time. The next morning, Sarah was at Riverside 20 minutes before opening. She asked Dr. Bennett to walk her through Emma's case again, from the beginning, not because she didn't trust the work, because something had moved, and Sarah needed to understand what. Dr. Bennett was 61 years old. Silver hair pulled back in the same low knot every day, soft voice, steady hands. She didn't sit across the desk from Sarah. She pulled her chair around, to the same side. That little gesture, Sarah noticed it every single time. Dr. Bennett explained something Sarah had never quite let herself hear. Delective mutism isn't always rooted in social anxiety, Sarah. For some children like Emma, it's rooted in something deeper. She talked about the unconscious connections children make, the way a 3-year-old can decide her own voice is the thing that broke her family, without ever knowing she's decided it. Sarah felt the room shift. "You mean she thinks it's her fault?" Dr. Bennett didn't answer right away. She just said, "Children don't reach these conclusions through logic, Sarah. They reach them by being 3 years old, by being scared, by being in the wrong place at the wrong moment." Sarah looked at her hands. She'd negotiated billion-dollar contracts. She'd fired people twice her age. She'd survived a husband's death. But she had never felt as small as she felt sitting in that office. Then Dr. Bennett said something else, something that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. "That man your daughter spoke to, David, he didn't approach Emma like a case to be solved. He approached her like a child. Most adults around children with mutism, they're calibrated, they're careful, they're trying. Children can feel it. They brace against it. David wasn't trying to do anything. He was just being a father, on the ground, present, without an agenda. That's what Emma needed to see. Not therapy, just an ordinary man doing an ordinary thing. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been forming all night. Could I ask him if Emma could spend more time around him and his daughter? Dr. Bennett didn't say no, but she said something Sarah didn't expect. Ask him as a person, Sarah, not as a CEO. He's allowed to say no. Sarah found David the next afternoon by the supply room. He was carrying a box of paper towels. She wasn't dressed for the conversation. She wasn't prepared for the conversation. She just blurted it out. If Emma spent more unstructured time around David and Lily, informally, no pressure, would David be okay with it? David put the box down. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, gently, but without hesitation, he said something that stopped her cold. I don't think that's the right way to approach this, Mrs. Mitchell. Sarah blinked. David kept going. Children aren't replicable. You can't recreate the conditions of a moment and expect the same result. If Emma spoke yesterday because something felt safe, the fastest way to destroy that safety is to engineer it. He wasn't unkind. He wasn't lecturing. He was just telling her the truth. There's a difference between helping and managing, Mrs. Mitchell. And I think you already know that. Sarah Mitchell hadn't been told no, flatly, plainly, by someone who wasn't her professional equal in years, and to her own surprise, it didn't make her angry. It made her pay attention. She drove home that night and thought about something her assistant had said 2 months earlier, when they'd had to lay off 12 people. Her assistant had cried. Sarah hadn't. Sarah had organized the severance packages and moved on. She thought about that now. She thought about how often, in her life, she'd treated people like projects, including her own daughter. And she wondered, for the first time in a very long time, whether the thing she was best at was also the thing that was breaking everything. What happened over the next 3 weeks wasn't a strategy. It was just afternoons. Sarah quietly shifted her schedule. She didn't announce it. She didn't tell David. She just made sure she was available in the courtyard during outdoor time. She didn't manufacture encounters. She just let Emma be near Lily, near David. And she watched. She watched Lily, 7 years old, no training, no degree, instinctively know how to be around a child who didn't speak. Lily would sit next to Emma over a puzzle, talk enough for 2, and Emma would listen, really listen, with her whole body. Once, Lily reached for a yellow bucket without finishing her sentence. Emma handed it to her, before Lily had asked. Sarah was sitting on the opposite bench when it happened. She put her coffee down, because she realized, with a kind of quiet, terrible honesty, that her daughter had just communicated with another human being, without using a single word. For the first time in 3 years, another afternoon, Sarah watched Lily place a small stone on the corner of Emma's puzzle. A page weight, Lily called it, for when the wind picked up. Emma studied the stone. Then she picked up another one, slightly smaller, and placed it on the opposite corner. 2 girls, no words, a puzzle that was no longer going anywhere. Sarah didn't write that one in her log. Some things weren't data. It was during one of those afternoons that Sarah and David first talked. Not about Emma, not about therapy, not about anything important. She asked him if the second-floor coffee was always that bad. He told her there was an 11-minute window in the late afternoon when it was almost drinkable. She laughed. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was the first laugh, actually the first real laugh, that Sarah had let out in a public space in over a year. She didn't know that at the time. David didn't either, but something in both of them noticed. The next week, she asked him how long he'd worked at the center. He told her, 3 years that February. She asked if maintenance was something he'd always done. David hesitated, not because the answer was hard, because the answer didn't usually come up. He told her about the carpentry shop, about the cribs and the kitchen tables, about Jennifer leaving, about the lease he couldn't keep and the daughter who needed a parent in the parking lot at 3. He told it without drama, without asking for sympathy. Sarah looked at his hands while he talked, the calluses she hadn't really noticed before, the small scar across the back of his left thumb that someone who'd built things for a living would have. She recognized that kind of choice, not because she'd made it herself, but because she'd watched her own father make it, quietly, when she was a kid. Her father had been a high school janitor in Worcester, Massachusetts. He'd raised 3 daughters on $26,000 a year. He'd died when Sarah was 22. She hadn't talked about him in business meetings in over a decade. She found herself telling David about him now, standing by the supply closet. Of all places, David listened. He didn't try to relate. He didn't try to compare. He just listened. And when she finished, he said one sentence. Sounds like he raised someone who turned out okay. Sarah went home that night and cried for 40 minutes in the parking garage of her apartment building, the fluorescent light above her car flickering the whole time. She couldn't have told you why. She just knew that something, somewhere, was finally allowed to come loose. It was Rachel Stone who saw it first, Sarah's operations director, 42 years old, sharp suits, sharper instincts. A reporter from a Boston business magazine had been trailing Sarah for a profile piece. The photograph was simple. Sarah and David, in the courtyard. Not touching, not doing anything dramatic, just talking. But the way they were leaning toward each other. The way both of them were entirely focused on the other person. It didn't look like a CEO talking to maintenance staff. It looked like the kind of attention people pay to someone they've decided to let in. Rachel slid the phone across the conference table on a Thursday morning. Sarah looked at the photo. She said, "What's the problem?" Rachel's answer was quiet, careful, and by the end of it, settled in a small dark corner of Sarah's mind, perception. Optics, a young female CEO, a board half full of men over 65, a maintenance worker with access to her daily schedule and her child, people who would say he was positioning himself. Sarah said, "He's never asked me for a single thing." Rachel said, "Perception doesn't require facts." Sarah didn't argue further. Rachel wasn't a villain. She was just doing her job, protecting a CEO's career from a story she didn't yet understand. But the words had landed, and they did their work in the dark. David noticed the shift within 3 days. It wasn't coldness. Sarah wasn't capable of being cold to him anymore. But she stopped arriving at the same time. She was more formal when they crossed paths. She stopped sitting on the bench. David understood immediately. Someone had said something, and it had done its work. He didn't push back, because he'd learned, the hard way with Jennifer, that the worst thing you can do when someone is figuring something out is to keep pressing against their defenses. And because Lily had started asking every single morning, "Are we going to see Emma today?" David didn't want his daughter to be attached to something that might be taken away. So he pulled back too, quietly, without telling anyone. He kept tying Lily's shoes in the same spot. He just stopped letting himself look toward the bench. That night, David came home and sat on the couch for 20 minutes before he stood up to start dinner. His back hurt where it had been hurting since last September. He hadn't been to a doctor about it. Doctors were for people whose insurance covered specialists. His covered the basics. Lily came in from the living room and asked if they could have macaroni. He said yes. He said it the way parents say yes to small things when they don't have anything bigger to give. Sitting at the kitchen table later, watching her eat, he thought about something he didn't usually let himself think about. He wasn't as wise as Mrs. Mitchell seemed to think he was. He was just tired in a way that was different from her tired. Sometimes being tired makes a person quieter, and being quieter, sometimes, looks a lot like wisdom. He knew the difference. He hoped she'd never have to find out. That night he fell asleep with the dish towel still in his hand. Lily covered him with the blanket from the back of the couch. She'd done it before. She knew where the blanket was. But Emma noticed. Of course she noticed. She had been built, by silence, into a child who could read a room better than most adults. She could feel the temperature drop without anyone telling her. She went stiller than her usual stillness. She stopped handing Lily the yellow bucket. She stopped sitting near the bench. She started watching the door, like she was waiting for someone she already knew wasn't coming. Sarah saw it. She told herself she was protecting David. She told herself she was protecting the company. Then one Wednesday evening, at her kitchen counter, she put it plainly to herself for the first time. She wasn't protecting anyone. She was managing her own fear, and the only person who couldn't help feeling the cost of that was the only person Sarah had ever wanted to protect, her daughter. The event was Sarah's idea, a community day, press coverage, activity stations, short remarks from the board. Riverside was one of 3 non-profits being highlighted. It was meant to be good. It was meant to demonstrate the company's commitment. In retrospect, it was almost perfectly designed for the worst possible outcome. Emma had been brought because her therapist had encouraged, supported social exposure. David and Lily arrived at 11:30. The press line shifted. The camera flashes multiplied. The ambient noise climbed past the threshold most adults don't notice. But for Emma, who had spent 3 years building walls against unpredictability, it wasn't a threshold. It was a wall. Emma started shaking, not visibly, internally. Sarah saw it from across the courtyard, and her body went into crisis management mode before her brain could stop it. She signaled the event coordinator. She signaled medical staff. She started clearing the space. All that efficiency, all that competence was exactly the wrong thing, because what Emma experienced wasn't rescue. It was the familiar acceleration of an adult world organizing itself around her, while she stood there unable to participate, unable to speak, unable to do anything but feel the machinery close in. David saw it from the far side of the courtyard. He didn't run. He walked, quickly, with direction. He reached Lily first. He said her name once. She came to him immediately, because she trusted him, and because she could see what he was moving toward. David sat down on the ground, right there, on the concrete, in front of cameras and donors and corporate banners. He sat Lily in front of him, and he created, without any announcement, without any drama, a small human perimeter between Emma and the noise. He said, to no one in particular, and therefore to Emma, Lily found a caterpillar this morning. We've been arguing about its name for 3 hours. Lily, who had in fact found a caterpillar, said, I think Gerald. David said in the same easy tone, Gerald is a very serious name for a caterpillar. Emma was still shaking, but she looked at him, and then she reached out. She gripped the front of his jacket with both hands, and the words that came out of her, so quietly that the people 3 feet away had to lean in to catch them, were these: don't make him go. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a scene. It was barely louder than the wind moving through the courtyard. but several people heard it. A journalist 3 feet away heard it. Rachel heard it from across the courtyard and went rigid. Sarah heard it. She was 10 feet away, mid-sentence, talking to the event coordinator. The sentence simply stopped. She didn't finish it. She stood there in the middle of her own corporate community day, and she heard her 6-year-old daughter beg a stranger not to be taken away. And she understood completely, all at once, that Emma wasn't talking about the afternoon. She was talking about every morning, after every door that had ever closed in her life. Rachel started moving toward David, controlled, professional. Removing a liability, Emma made a sound, not a word, but it was the opposite of calm. Sarah said Rachel's name, just once, but the way she said it stopped the entire courtyard. The event survived. The press didn't get a usable story, because the story they'd just witnessed was too complicated for a caption. But surviving the event wasn't the thing that mattered. What mattered was what Sarah did next. Sarah called David the next morning, from her car, parked on a side street, before anyone had arrived at the office. She said she owed him an apology, and she wanted to give it in person. They met half an hour before the center opened, in the family lounge, slightly yellow lighting. Basket of board games no one had ever sorted. Sarah took off her jacket. It was the first time, she realized later, that she had met with someone professionally, without at least one layer of armor on. She told him she was sorry for letting other people's opinions affect how she'd treated him, for the distance of the past 2 weeks, which she told herself was protecting him, but had really been protecting her. She told him she was sorry that Emma had felt it. David listened. He didn't accept the apology quickly, which she respected. He said, "You don't have to apologize for being afraid, Sarah. You have to be careful about who you let inside the fear." Then he said one more thing, something she would carry for the rest of her life. Emma doesn't need a perfect mother. She needs a mother who's safe enough to be scared with her. The sentence hit Sarah somewhere she didn't know was exposed. She turned away from him. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, she cried the way the thing actually deserved. Not controlled, not scheduled, not managed, just cried. David didn't try to stop her. He didn't say, "It's okay." He just stayed where he was and handed her a paper towel from the dispenser on the wall, which wasn't romantic, but it was exactly right. That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She didn't open her laptop. She didn't return any calls. She didn't read Emma a chapter of an educational book. She just sat on Emma's bed, light on the lowest setting, a picture book open between them that neither of them was reading. And Sarah said the thing she had never let herself say out loud. "Mummy was scared that night, baby." The night Daddy left. Emma went very still. Sarah kept going. "Mummy was scared, and Mummy made some mistakes because of it. And Mummy has been trying so hard to fix everything that I forgot to just sit with you inside the scary part. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I let you be afraid alone." The silence held for 1 second, 3. And then Emma made a sound, half a sob, half a word, and she pressed her face against her mother's side with a force that was almost desperate. Small arms locked around Sarah's waist, and she cried the way only a child cries, completely, without reservation. Sarah held her. She didn't try to organize it. She didn't try to fix it. She just held. After a long time, Emma lifted her face. Her eyes were swollen. She looked at her mother with the expression of someone who had been carrying a question for a very long time and had decided, finally, to ask it. "Mummy, don't be mad if I talk," Sarah broke. "There's no other word for it." She held Emma's face in both hands, and through everything that was making it almost impossible to speak, she said, "Your voice, baby. Your voice has never been the thing that made me angry. Not one time. Your voice is the most beautiful sound in the world." Emma blinked once. She settled back against her mother. She pulled the picture book between them, and she pointed at a word on the page. And she said it, just one word, out loud. For the first time in 3 years and 2 months, the word was moon. Sarah didn't correct the way Emma said it. She didn't praise it. She just nodded, the way you nod when someone tells you something true. And then she pointed at the next word, and waited. Emma looked at the page for a long second, and then she said that one too. The next morning Emma didn't speak. Sarah didn't ask her to. Sarah poured the milk, set the spoon next to the bowl, sat down. 3 days went by. Not one word. Sarah felt the old panic rise the way it always rose. Fast, bright, professional. The voice in her head started building plans. Call Dr. Bennett. Schedule extra sessions. Do something. Fix something. But this time, for the first time, Sarah noticed the voice instead of obeying it. She noticed it the way you notice a song stuck in your head. You don't have to sing along. You can just let it play and keep pouring the milk. On the morning of the 4th day, Emma pointed at a bird outside the window and said, "Bird," that was all. Sarah nodded. She didn't make a big deal of it. She didn't write it in a log. She just poured a little more milk into Emma's cereal. That was the moment, she would say later, that she finally understood what Dr. Bennett had been trying to tell her for months. Recovery isn't a line going up. It's a conversation where sometimes a child needs to stop talking, just to make sure stopping is still allowed. Emma kept stopping. Emma kept starting. The pattern was uneven. It would stay uneven for a long time. But the door, the one that had been closed for almost 3 years, was open now, and nobody was rushing to push through it. Sometimes love sounds like silence. Sometimes it sounds like the word bird. Sometimes, if you're very patient, it sounds like a 6-year-old asking for more milk. The following Monday, Sarah walked into her executive team meeting and addressed the photograph before anyone else could. She looked directly at Rachel, and she said something the company would talk about for years. "David Reynolds is a person who helped my daughter in a way that none of our resources, our systems, or our considerable budgets were able to do. He helped her by treating her like a child instead of a case. I will not have his name used as a liability in this organization, and I will not have speculation about his motives tolerated in this building." She paused. We put corporate image ahead of the emotional health of a 6-year-old child. That is not a mistake we will make again. Rachel wasn't fired. Sarah didn't believe in public humiliation as a management tool. But Rachel was spoken to, privately, at length, and by the end of that conversation, Rachel understood something she hadn't understood before. She had miscalculated where her CEO's priorities actually lived. The company expanded its partnership with Riverside, not as a PR initiative, as actual operational funding, for more staff, better materials, a redesigned family space that Dr. Bennett had been requesting for years. David was asked if he wanted to consult on the design. He said yes, on one condition, that it be built around what the kids actually needed, not around what looked good in a press release. Sarah sent back word that those were her exact instructions. They started meeting on Tuesday afternoons to review proposals. The first time David walked into the conference room with sketches, not drawn on a tablet, but on a yellow legal pad in soft pencil. Sarah noticed the way the architects went quiet, the way they leaned forward, the way old skill when it shows up, makes a room reorder itself. David's sketches had a child's reach in them, a shelf height a 6-year-old could actually use, a bench wide enough for a parent to sit beside a kid instead of across from them, a reading corner without a single right angle, because right angles, he said, made small bodies feel watched. The architects took notes. Sarah didn't say anything. She just watched a man she'd once walked past in a hallway tell a room of professionals what their building had been missing. The Tuesday meetings were professional. Both of them knew they were also something else, something growing slowly, something neither of them was rushing. 6 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon in early December, David was in the courtyard replacing the chain on the old swing set. Lily was at the far end of the yard, explaining something complicated to one of the staff. Emma came through the garden door at 3:58. Sarah was 2 steps behind, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the second-floor machine. She had learned the 11-minute window. Emma walked directly toward David. She stopped a few feet away. She watched him work for a moment, the way she'd watched him tie a shoe weeks earlier in this same courtyard. Then she turned around, and she looked at her mother. Her voice was clearer than it had ever been. Not loud, not effortless, but entirely there. She said, "Mommy, can he stay?" Sarah stopped walking. The 2 cups of coffee were suddenly very difficult to hold. She looked at her daughter, this small, precise person, who had come back to her 1 syllable at a time, and she felt the entirety of the last 3 years collect itself into this single ordinary moment. She crouched down. She set the coffee cups on the bench beside her. She pressed her lips to the top of Emma's head, and she held them there. David had set down the chain. He was watching the 2 of them. He understood what the question was actually about. And he understood that the answer wasn't something you gave in a courtyard on a Friday afternoon. It was something you built, carefully, over time, starting with small things, not skipping steps. He looked at Sarah. She had stood back up. She wasn't wearing the face she wore in boardrooms. She was wearing the face of someone who had finally put the armor down and was finding out whether the ground would hold. She didn't make a declaration. She didn't promise anything large. She just said, "If you want. We could start with dinner." It wasn't much, but it was offered without qualification, without the careful architecture of a woman managing her exposure. It was just a sentence. The way things are said when you've finally stopped being afraid of what the answer might be. David looked at Lily, who had appeared at some point during this, arms crossed, expression of enormous satisfaction, as if she'd personally orchestrated the whole thing. He looked back at Sarah. He said, "Yeah, I'd like that." The light had gone the color of old gold. Lily was already telling Emma about a caterpillar named Gerald, speaking slowly, because she had learned to speak slowly, and Emma was listening, with her whole body turned toward the voice she had chosen to let in. The swing set was still unfinished. The chain was lying coiled in the grass. It could wait. The 4 of them stood in the courtyard in the last of the afternoon light. A woman in a tailored coat she had stopped using as armor. A man in a navy work jacket with a yellow legal pad sticking out of one pocket. A 7-year-old with a notebook of color-coded questions. A 6-year-old who had, for now, chosen to stay on this side of the glass. And nothing was resolved. Not the way resolutions look in movies. Clean, complete, tied with a bow. But something was beginning the way real things begin, imperfectly, without ceremony. One small word at a time. There's something else that happened. Sarah didn't know about it until the next morning. The night Emma said the word moon. After Sarah had finally fallen asleep, Emma got out of bed. She walked, in her socks, down the hallway to the kitchen. She took the magnetic alphabet letters off the refrigerator door, and she spelled on the kitchen floor 2 words. She left them there for her mother to find in the morning. The 2 words were, "Thank you." She didn't know who they were for. The man in the courtyard, the woman who had finally sat down beside her in the scary part, the 7-year-old who had handed her a stone, maybe all of them, maybe herself, 3 years younger, on the night she'd decided to go quiet. Sarah found the letters at 6:15 the next morning. She didn't move them for 2 days. There's a kind of person we all walk past without thinking, the one fixing the lock on the door we just pushed through, the one wiping down the table we're about to sit at, the single parent in the school pickup line who looks like they haven't slept. We don't mean anything by it. There's just so much to look at, and so little time. But children, the most honest watchers in the world, they don't filter. They see who's actually there. They see who kneels down to their height, who answers the question instead of the parent, who tells a story while tying a shoe. And one day, sometimes years later, they speak to the person who saw them first. Not always the one with the right title, not always the one we expected. Sometimes the one with calluses on his hands and a yellow legal pad in his pocket. That's the part of this story that's worth carrying, not the lesson, the picture. A man kneeling on concrete, a girl tugging on a sleeve, 2 words, and a mother in a tailored suit she had finally stopped hiding inside, hearing her daughter say them. If this story stayed with you, don't share it yet. Sit with it for a few minutes first. Think about someone in your own life you've walked past without really seeing. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's the version of yourself at 7 that nobody bent down to look at properly. Once you've thought of them, you'll know what to do next. That's the part of the story this video can't tell for you. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people nobody else is looking at. That's where the real story always starts.